I'll be right back. Just one moment.
Hi, Brian.
Hello, Holly. Can you see and hear me?
I can.
Okay.
You obviously you can see and hear me as
Hello,
well.
Brian.
Hey, Ron, Holly, how are you tonight?
Good.
It's good.
Good.
Hard to believe January is almost over.
I
not
am so
really.
happy that it is. Days get longer and a little warmer every day.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, we'll wait just a moment. Okay, it is 5:30. I will call the meeting of the Personnel Committee to order. First, just call of the roll. Myself, Brian Coleman, Terry Berthelot are here. So the meeting is fully occupied. Any public comment, any member of the public who's indicated they wish to address us?
We received no public comment.
Okay. Next item is the approval of the minutes of our special meeting of December 13th. Does anyone have any amendments, corrections on the minutes? And if not, is there a motion for approval of the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes for December
Second.
13th, 2021.
Terry seconds the motion. Okay, all in favor?
All right.
We have no old business. For new business, we can get up to date on the impact and more generally the discussion of vaccine mandate issue. Ryan, I see, is on with us. Just basically, we've discussed this a bit, but where are we after the Supreme Court ruling, governor's orders, and so forth, and in terms of our negotiations with the employee associations?
So I don't know if you, Ron, if you tossed it over to Holly specifically, but I can take a little bit of a swing at it.
Okay.
So, so yeah, the Supreme Court ruling, obviously complicated matters because, we, like probably most municipal organizations, at least that I'm familiar with around the state, were hoping that being able to hang our hat on the OSHA ETS and basically adopt that by reference rather than forging our own trail would be, basically the direction we wanted to go. It seemed to provide us a security blanket of sorts. And as we talked about at one point, limit the scope of anything that might otherwise have to be bargained with the unions if it was basically just adhering to a federal mandate. As you say, the Supreme Court struck down the mandate. And then the other sort of later breaking development that you all may or may not have heard something about, I think news broke on Friday, and that was that a federal district court in Texas had also rendered a decision against the Biden administration's federal employee mandate. And I've had limited conversations thus far with Ken Weinstock, the town's labor attorney. And, for reasons I assume you'll, I trust you'll appreciate, I don't want to get into too much of this in public session, but suffice it to say that's irrelevant, that case may have legal relevance, even though we're talking about federal employees, may have some relevance to what municipalities have been looking to do in terms of adopting our own policies if the federal OSHA ETS was struck down. So continue to, we have a draft policy that we had actually been updating as late as this past week. And Attorney Weinstock have been helping us with that, with the expectation that we would be moving forward with our own organizational level policy, given the support that direction seemed to have. But Attorney Weinstock, as late as today with communications we've been having, believes that there's more to be discussed in light of what happened this past Friday, on top of the Supreme Court's decision from a week or so earlier. So that's where things stand.
May I ask, apart from the schools, which is not our concern in this topic, does the state of Connecticut have anything that mandates or forbids us from doing anything in this area?
I don't believe so. My understanding, based on past conversations with Attorney Weinstock and Holly, is that obviously there's a potential that we would see a legal challenge, or the state, frankly, would see a legal challenge, sort of analogous to what the federal government has seen for its employees. That would be speculative at this point, but nothing legally would sort of inhibit us from proceeding on our own as it stands now, barring additional case law that's kind of playing out in a real-time fashion.
So what will you be asking the board, and maybe via the personnel committee, for in this area?
I guess honestly, what I am asking for in this area is just a little more patience while we continue to iron this out. I mean, this is not, I think the board as a whole, maybe individual opinions may vary, but I think going back now to the latter portion of 2021, when we were talking about these things, it was not lost on me that the board as a body feels strongly they'd like to see action taken in this area, and certainly understand the board's desire in that respect, and with and for all the right reasons in terms of why the council would like to see that happen. But as I'm sure everybody hopefully can appreciate, we have to gather information. We have to hear out the various arguments, if you will, being made by our labor attorney, and understand where he's coming from. Right now, I mean, again, what other communities do need not have any specific bearing on what we do. But at the moment, there's been no action, taken by our fellow municipalities across the state to move forward on their own mandate, now that the Supreme Court struck down the federal standard. So the reasons for that could be all over the board. So
this is conceptually, to some of us, it seems like the mask mandate is kind of in the same ballpark, but it's really not. And well, we have no apparent, to my knowledge, there was no challenge to the mask mandate that we and many others imposed, not only for the town, but not only for the town building, but for many establishments in town. But the vaccines are different. And so,
yeah, I think we start venturing into issues, pertaining to people's medical decisions. It's a different animal.
Anyone else have anything? Brian?
Yeah, January 19th, Governor Lamont has decided to let all their vaccine and COVID-19 testing mandates expire on February 15th. Why are we even pursuing this at this particular point? Secondly, how much is this? What is the financial impact of the attorneys working on this issue?
I mean, at this point,
if I might just say, we can pursue this. The governor's mandate did not forbid the towns from having their own policy. Is that's correct?
Yeah, they're unrelated. I mean, what the governor is doing with state employees has no direct bearing on what municipalities do. I mean, I think, like Brian, I mean, I've certainly observed and took note of when the governor announced that seemingly taking the foot off the gas there and letting the state mandate the order for state employees to be vaccinated expire next month. So definitely took note of that, but one thing is not directly related to the other. I mean, as far as, you know, the council with the town's labor attorney, we're, you know, probably talking about like a billable hour at this point.
Brian?
I'd be interested to know if the state of Connecticut was facing any legal challenges. I don't want to see us get involved in any legal challenges for something that we may not even need at this particular point in time. I mean, it's being challenged on the both federal and state level around the country. So I'm not so sure if we want to get into this.
I would counter that by saying we'll get sued when somebody rides in the ambulance and catches COVID from one of our paramedics. So we're likely to get sued in multiple places. At this point, it would be negligence for us to knowingly have people who are interacting with our public and not taking every possible step to keep people safe. I don't know where the lawsuit would come out, but I would certainly sue if somebody from my family rode in an ambulance and caught COVID. So we don't avoid lawsuits by doing nothing.
I would agree with that. Is there anything else to say on this topic at this point? This is something that the full council will certainly weigh heavily in on. I'm not sure if the Personnel Committee is the place to make a recommendation. And certainly we don't have as much information, the full council, as we will in a short time, but this will be certainly discussed. If there's nothing else on this topic, you may remember, second topic, when the town council did, as they must do every 2 years, an approval of rules of procedure. Part of that resolution was to ask the Personnel Committee to review the rules of procedure and make or not make recommendations as seemed to be appropriate. So I asked Holly to send you each copies of the rules of procedure, which were last changed several months ago and largely had to do with COVID-related virtual participation. So I looked at the rules and I had a few comments, and others of you may. And if it's all right, I could just begin with my own. On the rules, if you have them before you, Rule 2H, which is on page 2, says that the minutes of the board are supposed to include deliberations, discussions, and actions, not just the actions. We have moved toward putting in essentially the actions. We have two choices, I think. One is to abide by the policy and have the minutes include deliberations, discussions, and actions, and this will place something of a heavy responsibility on those taking the minutes, or change the policy. One or the other of those, but I'm not comfortable leaving the policy as it is and not abiding by it. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Brian?
I wrote the town manager last week in this regard to the minutes. And I have noticed, I've been following the minutes of town council for years. And I have noticed that discussions and deliberations have been kind of eliminated. A lot of discussions and emotions have been eliminated. I would like to see those included now. As
I
they
read
were
our
in the
policy, that
past.
is what our
And
policy.
I'm agreeing with what you're saying as far as what's missing here. And I think that we should abide by our own policies and keep the policy the same.
Terry?
And I would go the other way. I think that Robert's rules clearly says that what goes in minutes should be the motions and the actions. And I'm afraid that if we do in deliberations, that essentially we're going to need somebody who can do shorthand and it's got to be verbatim, because it's going to turn into, oh, I didn't say that, or I said that, or that wasn't emphasized enough, or I mean, what counts as a deliberation? And I'm not sure that we want verbatim what goes on. And it also gives if some of it gets captured and part of it doesn't get captured, then that which gets captured gets higher sort of significance than what doesn't get captured. I don't see, I think the vote is the motion and the vote, and the various, attempts to, amend it and stuff matter, but the actual back and forth, I don't see any benefit in that.
One small point, I would assume that our rules of procedure, which reference Robert's rules, but if we say something specific in our rules, that supersedes Robert's rules.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, at one point, I remember Mr. Freudman, maybe more than once, specifically asked that a comment that he had made be included in the minutes. And we voted to include that in the minutes. My feeling is if a member of the council specifically asks that, I would be inclined to approve that.
And again, I would say that's lousy, because then whatever that was becomes part of the official record. So my response to Mr. Freudman would not have been included, and my response may have been just as important. So whatever we put in the minutes becomes history. And so picking and choosing just because somebody happens to say, I want it written down. I mean, there's certainly a place for in public comment. You can actually write something and have it written up and be part of a late, added later. But I think capturing something just because somebody wants it there is going to skew the conversation and lead to later a misunderstanding of what the debate was about.
That could be. On the other hand, there have been times when I've wanted to know the reason something was done, and I see nothing in the minutes indicating that.
But you'll only have the person, I'm sorry, Brian, I'll stop talking after this. I see your hand is up. But you'll only have the person who made the fuss. So you won't have the whole debate. You'll just have that one comment.
Yeah.
And you won't have, unless it's verbatim, you won't have a meaningful capture of what happened. You'll just have what, if I'm the one who made the fuss, what Councilor Berthelot wanted in the record.
I'm not sure I agree, but in any case, Brian?
Well, it is in the procedure now, and if it's in the procedures, our minutes should reflect that, and they don't at the moment.
Yeah.
So let's go by the procedures.
Terry, is your wish that we change the procedure, because we should change the procedure if we're not going to abide by it?
That's right. Tony's here. She has her hand up too.
Yeah, Tony?
I just want to say that one of the problems with representing a personal opinion is that there have been times when people on the council have made misstatements of fact and have wanted that their belief, which was actually factually incorrect, included in the record of the minutes. And when that happens in the course of a meeting, I often have, and so has been, spoken up to put on the audible record, the recording, what we believe to be actual fact. And if we're going to allow a full description of an argument, you're going to have to simply transcribe everybody's statements, because we've been pretty good at having, rather than having argument, having statements that are factual and inclusive. And I don't see how you can accurately represent a debate on a substantive issue unless you put everything in, including staff reports.
So Tony, is your recommendation that we change the policy?
Yes, I think the policy of keeping to what is actually done is important. I think people can always watch up to a year, can watch the debate, they can stream it. So if somebody wants to be heard or to be seen, or they can ask people to go look. But I think that it will make for a waste of time, frankly, and a waste of staff time in trying to capture the entirety of a debate.
I think my experience, based on serving on other boards and my experience as executive secretary to the Yukon Board of Trustees, was that it's doable. So I differ. But if there is at this point a motion, as I say, we can either change the policy or abide by the policy, but we can't leave the policy and not abide by it. So I would, if there is a motion to change the policy, that can certainly be made.
Brian's got his hand up.
Yeah, Brian?
Oh, yeah, just for an example, you know, at previous meeting, I brought up the minutes, feeling that they should include debate, and apparently I was correct. And that fact didn't even show up in the minutes. I mean, certainly something like that, as mentioned, certainly should be put in the minutes of our meetings. It was totally ignored and left out.
I'm sorry, was this a board meeting or a full
No,
council
it
meeting?
was a town council meeting. I brought up this very issue that we're discussing right now, and it was omitted from the minutes, not even included.
That would be something that you might make motion to have
Yeah.
amended in the minutes.
But again, it begs the question. I mean, so you're right, Brian. The ruling against you, if you put it in the form of a motion, was incorrect. But we as counselors all have the ability to go to the actual rules and then bring them forward, and then have an actual conversation about, with the rules in front of us. And like we're doing now, we'll put a motion on the table. It will get voted down or it won't, but the motion and the votes will stand for the future. But our whole back and forth here, I just don't see what the consequence is. And I don't think Holly or anybody else has the skill set to capture it all.
Excuse me, Brian, will you, if I understood, you made a motion that was not approved, and that motion was not reflected
I
in
did
the
not, it was not a motion, but it was a comment in the by councilors. That section of the agenda, I mentioned
okay.
the minutes.
So comments by members of the council, would they be not part of a motion, not part of the business of motions and approval, but comments by council members, which is part of our agenda? Should that routinely be included in the minutes?
Oh, of course. One of my comments was included and the other was not. So it seems like someone's making a decision on what to put in there and what not to put in there.
Okay.
I made 2 comments and one was completely omitted.
Okay.
Put them both in or none.
Well, without getting at the intent, sometimes things happen that can be amended when the minutes come before us. Well, where do we want to go with this? As a personnel committee charged with making recommendations on town procedures.
I'm sorry, I don't see where in the packet is the what's
on
included in their minutes. Can you?
2H. Town clerk is the clerk of the council, et cetera, et cetera. Keep public inspection of minutes for all its proceedings, including all roll call votes, and indicating deliberations, discussions, and actions, which shall be the official record of council proceedings. That's toward the bottom of page 2. Now, we could interpret that to mean only that the council deliberated and discussed,
Yep.
but that to me is not what this really means.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's very meaningful. Obviously, we deliberated and discussed. So I'll make a motion to change the town council rules of procedure that was adopted on February 8th, 2021. In section 2, meetings, H, to read instead, that the town clerk is the clerk of the council and shall, in accordance with the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act, keep for the public inspection minutes of all its proceedings, including all roll call votes and actions, which shall be the official record of the council proceedings.
Is there a second? The motion does not have a second.
Guys are now, all we're gonna do now is fight about who didn't get what in, but
Well, it goes to the full council. They can move
yeah.
to
That's-
change.
No,
things.
they can't. There's nothing, we're not changing anything unless they put this on their agenda. We're not gonna be recommending
Put it on
a
their agenda for a
non-change.
subsequent meeting. Yeah. Okay. The other things that I found in here of less import, just to bring people's attention. Rule 2I on page 3, a quorum of council members can't discuss substantive business via email. Now, we know that that's a rule. It's state law precludes caucuses from being covered by that. Can members of a committee, our 3-person committee means any 2 of us, thus we are precluded from discussing substantive business via email unless we count ourselves as a caucus, and that would include the 2 members of the majority party in this case. So just that that's all understood. We can talk about times of meetings. We can talk about, I imagine we can talk about what's on the agenda as long as you don't get into a substantive discussion of the matter, but we cannot discuss substantive business. As we know, Rule 3B, page 3, just to note that any single, as we all know, but some of us need to be reminded, any single member can have something taken off the consent agenda. It doesn't require a vote of the council, just the request of a single member. Rule 3F, page 3, recurring old business items shall have an end date to be determined by the council. My memory is not one that we have done that, but maybe I'm in error. Have we?
Yeah, Robert's rules strongly argues against having this category at all of old business, that there's really no benefit in that. So probably because stuff just kept getting, at some point, staying on the agenda. I guess that's why that was added, but no, we haven't been doing that in some time.
So either we do it or we change the rule, I would say. And as between the 2, I would change the rule. Generally, we haven't found ourselves enormously overburdened by cluttered old business items. And if we're supposed to have an end date, but haven't been having an end date, I would move that we remove that reference to the end date. I'll make that as a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Could you please repeat that, Ron?
Okay. There's
What's
an
your point?
item on page 3, item 3F, that requires that recurring old business items shall have an end date to be determined by the council. We have not been doing that. And I'm not sure that in that case, either we should change the policy or eliminate or abide by the policy. And I move to change the policy to remove that requirement of an end date.
Okay.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, all in favor? Aye.
All right.
Okay.
Would you read for me how that should read then, so that I have it captured?
To eliminate Rule 3F on page 3, the language recurring old business items shall have an end date to be determined by the council.
So that I'm clear, we're eliminating F or just
Yes.
the words end date?
Well, if we just eliminated end date, recurring old business items shall be determined, Well, I would eliminate the language entirely.
Thank you.
Okay. Rule 6D, page 5. Ordinances may not be amended on the day of the first public hearing except by majority vote. The question in my mind was, can they be amended after that?
Well, wait a minute. All right, so the provision may be suspended by majority vote. So your question is whether an ordinance, a standing ordinance, can be amended in the future?
Hold on.
And the answer would be no. It says may not amend, adopt. So to change an ordinance would be to amend it in some way, and it clearly says here no.
Hold on just a moment, please.
I think the rule that modifies a rule that says that that changing an ordinance requires a public hearing with a vote at the following meeting.
Right. May it
And
then be amended?
Why would you amend it?
Well, for whatever substantive reason somebody might have.
But again, you couldn't do it unless, so you could suspend, well, first off, it wouldn't be, so there wouldn't be a public hearing going on. And
Right.
maybe there would be, so it couldn't just be on the fly. So this is in response to there being a public hearing.
Right. So there's a
So-
public hearing. And by majority vote on that day, the ordinance can be amended. But then at a subsequent meeting, when the ordinance is up for final adoption, at that point, the language seems to be silent. May it be amended at that time?
Wouldn't
Yes,
think
of
so.
course.
Even though there's been a public hearing based on specific language, and now we have something that's a little different because it's been amended?
Generally, well, we have control over the ordinances.
Yeah.
And we hold public hearings, and only in the circumstance where we make a substantive change, a major procedural difference or something, then we'll take it back to a second public hearing. But amending to correct or modify or improve without making a substantive change in the ordinance content, we do that routinely.
And that's fine with me, but if we did make a substantive change, is there language that requires that we have a second public hearing?
No,
So we are free, if we wish to, in our wisdom, amend an ordinance the next week, the next meeting after the public hearing, to go ahead and do that without a second public hearing.
yes.
I take it would be dependent on whether or not you are changing the ordinance anyway. I mean, you're just amending a little language or something like
Yeah.
of that sort. You're not making a major change to your ordinance. That's what you're getting at, right, Mayor?
Yes, I mean, you're gonna impose a whole new set of regulations, and you have the language, and you hold a public hearing, and somebody comes up and says, I think Section 3 is unconstitutional, and you have to undo Section 3, and so that's a major change. If somebody says, I think you should put Section 4 ahead of Section 3, that's technical. That doesn't require another hearing. But if you're going to make a major change, I mean, my example is the ethics ordinance, which we did. It must have been 4 or 5 separate public hearings on, but we continued to make amendments in response to the public hearings.
Yeah. And that's fine, and that was good and wise discretion, but there's nothing in our rules of procedure that so requires.
Or forbids.
What's that?
Or forbids.
Right. And if everybody's okay with that, I'm actually okay with it as well, but I wanted to bring out the point about there being silent language on that. Next one was a point of controversy about a year or two ago. Rule 7H, page 5. Any other motion can be reconsidered only at the same or next meeting of the council. So if a motion is made and defeated, it cannot be reconsidered unless one of the people on the winning side of that, voting to defeat it, wishes to make that motion. My only question is, what if circumstances change? Don't ask me to think up a hypothetical, but if you give me a few minutes, I will.
Well, I think, Ron, it would be on the onus would be on the person trying to revisit whatever the topic was to demonstrate that there'd been a change. And the mayor makes a ruling, I just can't, I don't think you can imagine every possible scenario,
No.
but you have to have a way of ending debate on things. And we keep every single meeting having the same conversation. So it's important that this particular rule stand, but recognizing that, of course, we're all capable of making distinctions and explaining why this is actually different.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Oh, just a small point. Tony, you would know the answers. So it requires that on page 2, the journal shall be authenticated by signature of the mayor or deputy mayor in the absence of the mayor. Do you comply with that? Do you sign the journal?
There is an electronic signature, which in times when it's purely pro forma is applied by the staff.
Okay. Those were my comments in reading it. And my other just thought, should the name of the personnel committee be changed to something like personnel and procedures? And what we're talking about now is not in normal parlance personnel.
I certainly hear where you're coming from. I can't see a reason why not to do that. Is there any other place where procedures are done?
I mean, as far as your council standing committees go, I mean, this is where these sorts of procedural, policy changes are certainly debated. Interestingly, shortly after I got here, I tried to, go back in the record and better understand what exactly the sort of official charges, as it were, of the various standing committees are, and it's pretty thin record. There are references made at some point, like it just sort of shows up that, they start referencing a personnel committee and maybe a vote taken to establish one, same with finance and whatever, but there's not really ever a mission statement, if you will, established.
This is not referenced in the town charter, is it? Personnel committee?
No.
So it would not require a charter change.
They're the
Well,
standard names of committees, not-for-profits. But I don't see any reason, a problem with renaming it to include the role of procedure.
Well,
I have
I'm
no
going to
problem with
offer a
that either.
motion. I'm sorry, Brian.
I have no problem with that too. Go ahead and move it.
So I'm going to move to change the name of the Personnel Committee to Personnel and Procedures Committee.
I'll second.
Second.
Comment? All in favor? Aye.
Yeah.
Okay. Those were my only comments on the rules of procedure. Does anybody else have anything on that? Brian?
So what are we accomplishing here? When we leave this meeting tonight, are the procedures going to be changed? The changes that we're making tonight going to be changed?
These, as I understand it, are recommendations to the council.
Okay, so when we leave here tonight, nothing has changed. So I would think that the minutes would have to come up to our standards and our rules and procedures starting tonight.
Well,
Sure.
Tony?
That's how it's written. Let's do it the way it's written. How can you argue with that? Otherwise, why have rules if we're gonna break them? No sense in even having them.
Okay. Again, our role is,
Well, I'm saying the procedures are here and now.
yeah, right.
So our minutes should be up to the standards of our procedures, including this meeting and the town council meeting tonight. And everyone after that. Because that is the rule and procedure of the town of Mansfield.
Now, we are advisory to the town council, and even if we are silent on a matter, the town council can essentially preempt us and make its own ruling. Is that
Sure,
correct?
but I'm talking about here and now.
Right, but talking about subsequent
Yeah.
meetings. Is that
You know,
correct?
and all the other meetings where the minutes weren't recorded properly. We're not doing it right, we're doing it wrong. That's come to light in this meeting.
Any comments, thoughts?
So let's get on the ball.
You do
Like I
have
said
record.
before, the minutes in the past were so much more detailed. Somewhere along the line, it's changed.
Now, let me, yes, I take that, I understand. Let me move to a different. The council could, going forward, change its policy. And going forward, that new policy would prevail.
Not tonight's meeting,
That's correct.
or the past meetings for that matter. Maybe you ought to update all those minutes.
The council has authority to determine on specific meetings what is presumably a relevant comment, what is presumably extraneous. We would be opening
I don't
some,
think the council has that authority. You know, it's in the rules, and it's up to the clerk to record the minutes according to the rules and procedures.
it depends on how you define terms like deliberation, discussion. You don't record every word that is spoken.
No, verbatim is not required. Debate that leads to action, I believe, should be included.
Ron, if I may.
Yes.
I guess just, kind of a couple observations on this. Certainly, if the council, whether the policy is changed or not, if the policy isn't changed, if it's the council's will, as a body, as a collective to, provide some guidance or clarification on its intent in that particular section of the rules. For instance, we talked about how, what exactly constitutes deliberations and discussions, and capturing that is frankly, a little bit open for debate. So I would say just a couple of things. I would say I am sure that staff, if the council provided its specific guidance, said, when we say this, this is the way we mean it and we intend for it to be followed. Staff, of course, will do that, unless there's some sort of substantive disagreement, about what's being contemplated in the procedures. But I think the discussion we've had, based on the discussion you've all had tonight, I don't see that happening. But also, I just want to, I guess, point out what I think is probably the most critical point, which is, once the council staff prepares draft minutes, and it's the council's job to review and approve them. And once they're approved, those are the minutes. So those are approved minutes. There's no, material defects to be ironed out with a given set of minutes going backward from that point. The council has sort of embraced it at that point. So I don't think that, aside from obviously the labor intensity of any sort of retroactive kind of reconstruction of more detailed minutes, I don't think that would be, warranted, because there weren't errors made. The council's approved the minutes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let me just give an example of something I mean. I would be happy with minutes that said, Councillor Shuren noted that the Personnel Committee has been dealing with procedures as well as personnel. Thus, he made the motion that the name of this committee be changed to Personnel and Procedures, giving very short, very brief rationale for that motion, so that those looking at the motion in the future would know the reason behind it. And that's as far as I would want to go with indicating that. Brian?
Just say that, hypothetically, someone disagreed with your motion
Yeah.
and had a logical reason for disagreeing with your motion that you just presented. Should that be included in the minutes?
I don't think the minutes necessarily need to reflect a debate.
That's deliberations, though.
It is deliberations.
I mean, let's define deliberation then, because you're not using the definition of deliberation. I mean, deliberation would include my entire argument against it, which I don't think belongs. I mean, you all, we had a vote, I lost. But if you're going to actually want a true record of what happened, it would include, if you're going to use the word deliberation, maybe you need to change the word deliberation. If you wanted a justification for a motion to be in the minutes, maybe you want a summary of the person who speaks to their motion. But to capture the entire give and take,
Yeah.
is
Well, I should say, in looking at the minutes, I cannot quote chapter and verse, but we have had in minutes, even in the past year, some brief discussion, in some cases, of rationale for actions taken.
and nobody, again, just because it happened does, it's that maybe that's the, nobody
I think that was a
found
good
issue
thing.
with it. I mean, we voted on it. I'm not sure just because something happened like that means we were following the letter of what it says here.
Right.
But, sometimes probably we all think that belongs there, and probably the town clerk thought it belonged there too. Maybe it was particularly important, but every single debate.
Well, can I suggest that because we have conflict over this, and because I don't want the council to have a lengthy debate on this without having given thought to it, that we defer further discussion of this matter to our next meeting. And meanwhile, we can informally ask council members to let us know, in a way that's appropriate under freedom of information, their feelings about it, so that we can reflect the general views of the council in determining whether to maintain this policy going to the future, amend it, or eliminate it. Rather than come forth this evening with a recommendation. Right?
I don't know
As
where.
of now, as of now, having not supported your motion, we're stuck with the policy as it is.
Well, either that, or we could go to the town council meeting and
Yeah.
change it at the town council meeting.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can poll for a substantive issue
No.
without getting into the Freedom of Information
No, we
Act.
could have a discussion. Okay. Any other
uh,
thought?
Could I
So-
ask Ryan a question?
Yeah.
Ryan, do you believe that our minutes are fulfilling our rules and procedures at this moment?
I would say that as currently worded, I think that the debate that's being had about drawing this, to our collective attention, that there's certainly a reasonable debate to be had about whether or not that's happening. I can say with a great deal of confidence that, to the extent that the minutes, and again, this is where reasonable people might disagree, but if there's a debate being had about whether or not the current minutes live up to Rule 2, sub-item H, it's certainly, not an intentional act by staff to omit a required component. I think, I don't know, I haven't gone back in time. I haven't done analysis to see how many years back or when, to the extent a shift, as you're describing, happened. I know that it's been said, I commented myself on one or two occasions after coming here that the minutes prepared and approved by the town council are less detailed than minutes on boards and committees that I've served in other positions in the past. That's not to say that one's better or less good. It's just, it was a difference that I noticed. The select board meeting minutes in the town of Enfield, New Hampshire, where I was previously, had a bit more detail. And so I received some feedback about what was customary and reviewed, certainly the state statute in Connecticut, and seemed to align with the way that we were doing the minutes. So, that's I guess best as I can answer your question.
If we were to say something like minutes are to include concise reference or concise notation of substantive discussion, that might help us get away from the lengthy ad hoc verbatim reference to what is said. But I myself have looked at minutes over the past and not been comfortable that I knew why the council was doing what it did. And one of the functions, I believe, despite what Robert's rule says in boards that I've been involved with, is to let the public and let members of future councils know why things were done that were done.
I'm all for transparency and, easy to read minutes. They don't need to be verbatim, but they need to be inclusive of content to everything that's said that leads to action. And I think some of that is being left out at this particular moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, where we are now
I
is,
will point out that the minute we do this, somebody is always going to want to have their argument included in the minutes. And I will assure you that I will want my argument included in the minutes as well. So
and your argument often is included, Tony.
no.
Yes.
The
Madam Mayor,
outcome is,
in the past minutes, your arguments were there. They're not in today's minutes. Refer back to minutes going back to 2013, 2015. They've changed. The content of our minutes have changed. They're not as inclusive as they were in the past.
I think there have been times when we had new staff where there was an attempt to expand the minutes, but we have always gone back to the format we use now.
I would be interested to know who wrote the policy as we now see it before us. But I have no institutional memory of that.
And I can't imagine how we're going to get into whether or not what I'm saying I said was really said at the original meeting. Because everything is recorded now and available for a year, I'm not sure, it'll mean actually, getting things transcribed and then rereading things and, but I don't see the point, but I think you feel one way and I feel another, I lost this battle. So I'm not so sure why we're still talking about it. I don't think I can convince you.
So at this point, the one thing that we have done is the removal of the end date reference on old business.
We're removing that entirely.
Yes, right. Other than that, I'm not sure where we should proceed on this. We have had our discussion. We are where we are. It will be for the council to determine whether it wishes to change the policy with regard to Rule 2H. And in terms of parliamentary procedure, since the Personnel Committee does not come forth with a recommendation on that, it would be up to an individual member of the council, Terry or anybody else, to make the motion there. And that would be added to the council agenda for a subsequent agenda, or tonight by motion, by a majority approval, added to new business. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, with that, is there any further business before this body? Brian?
There's one thing I would like to recommend, of course, it's going to have a financial impact. But I'd like to see each and every council member take a Robert Rules of Order class to be funded by the town.
There has been, we've had training sessions before, and we had one on open public meetings, and that included not just council members, but Board of Ed and other board members. I would certainly think that would be very useful and good. Who would be the person to conduct that? Would it be our town clerk, or who would it be?
So I've seen towns do that differently. Sometimes it's the town attorney. Sometimes, I don't know if that would be the case here, but so in New Hampshire, the KERMA equivalent, the insurance agency that they actually had like a sort of government policy procedures sort of training that they made available to members. Again, I don't think our insurance company would do that here. So I can certainly start with a staff discussion, but I think unless there's a state organization that does it, it probably would be a training that Kevin would provide.
And can I say, though, that what's important is not so much, so the problem with the training is that it implies that the rules are fixed, or that we have to follow the rules. What's more important is everybody should have this. You guys can't see it, I'm sorry. It's the book. You just have to read it, and you have to raise the points, and we have to debate them. But we as a council can always overrule Robert's rules. We're not bound by it, absolutely. So it's not like the US Constitution. So it's really not, it's a set of procedures and a set of rules that we can choose to follow or not to follow in any given evening, when we can interpret how we want to interpret it. So I don't think it's a bad idea to do a training. It might make people feel more comfortable, but it's not like the court, it's not like the rules of evidence in a courtroom. It's something we as a group, by the majority rule, can choose to follow or not to follow.
I believe so. We don't get too scared by the volume of that, by the size of that book. We have been guided by the abridged version. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, the 11th edition. It's a yellow, much thinner book. It's a yellow cover.
Yeah, this is the 12th edition. It's actually not that big a deal. I mean, I mark the things that are important so that they're handy to get to. But we're all smart people. We can all handle this. But yeah, there is a smaller version as well.
But a couple of years have passed since we had that training on FOI, and I would like to see full training on many such things, including FOI, Robert's rules.
But what you just said, so there are rules on the Freedom of Information Act. That's a law. So somebody can train you and tell you this is the law and you have to follow it. But that's not the case with Robert's rules. Robert's rules is very much about interpretation. It's a guidance, and it's largely not, the words in it are often open for interpretation. And it's so important to remember the distinction between what we're bound to follow and what we're not bound to follow, and what we can choose to follow or not to follow. And so the problem with having a training is the possibility of people misunderstanding. Well, so maybe the training would be to make that clear to everybody.
I think it would be helpful to people, particularly new council members, and to see how things generally operate, understanding that it could be changed, and also understanding that our rules of procedure supersede Robert's rules. They incorporate Robert's rules, but supersede.
Yeah, but also, they operate differently in different settings.
Yeah.
And radically
We're reasonably
differently.
intelligent people, but there have been questions, and it would not be hurtful to have some discussion.
But just that, so an attorney stands up in the room and says, rightly or wrongly, that mostly this is the way, we're not bound by that.
No, but it's
And so
so
I guess my question is, what's the point of having the attorney do that?
Well, it doesn't have to be the attorney. It could be the town clerk, and it could be somebody who's saying, this is how we generally operate, so that when you're sitting in the meeting and you don't understand why something happened, it happened because this is the general way we're doing things, understanding that it could be changed ad hoc.
Yeah, but why would Sarah Ann have more expertise than you in Robert's rules?
Because she has as her function being the clerk of the council, and there may be some others who have more expertise than she.
I just, yeah, I don't, I
We
mean,
disagree,
Robert's
Terry.
rules is action.
Well,
It's,
we disagree.
I was just talking about a class.
Yeah.
I thought it would help everybody.
but again, a class
That's all.
implies that that it's law, that it's fixed policy, and it's not. It's just, it's rules of order that can be adopted. We chose to adopt it, but we can choose not.
Have you taken the class?
I don't know of any class.
Yeah, so.
But I've read
this
the
class is
rules.
Available, and I'm sure they would, bring everybody up to date on how everything works, including what you just said, I hope.
We
I
can
think-
argue about
I
whether
think
this
that
could be
if
helpful,
you
but I don't
look-
think anyone could say this could be harmful.
No, not at all. Be helpful.
First of all, I think CCM might do it,
Mhm.
might
Yeah.
have one.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think our rules have some of the most important pieces to it, the motions and precedents.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't think it hurts to do a simplified one, but the fact of the matter is that Robert's rules can be used to screw up a whole meeting by somebody who just wants to play arcane rules and not just proceed with what's at hand. So I'm not opposed to having a little bit of a training, but I think that we really do have to remember that we are in charge of what we do.
Mhm.
So if there's a general consensus that you'd like to at least know, what sort of options exist, I can start some conversations, internal and external, and perhaps propose some next steps if that sounds good.
Yes.
I mean, well, certain things come up. When I first joined the council, for example, I did not know the rule about speaking twice to a motion. Now, as soon as it was told to me, I understood it, but there may be other such things that in our normal procedure, which can be overridden, be good to know for new council members how things operate. Anyway, for that, with that, is there anything else before us at this point? So that we have a little bit of time for dinner before the meeting.
I would just say that if you're gonna have somebody who's is not familiar with our rules, then their interpretation of Robert's rules may not actually may not be helpful. So
Get the
it's,
right person.
I'm sorry.
Then get the right person. Okay.
So are we gonna move this to the council tonight, Ron?
The only motion that we will have to the council is the change that we talked about in terms of an end date for old business. I will tell the council when it's time to give the report of the Personnel Committee that we debated other aspects of the rules of procedure, but did not come to any recommendations other than that. Okay, with that, is there a motion for us to adjourn?
So
I
moved.
move to adjourn.
Second, all in favor? Okay, we are adjourned. I will see you all in about 28 minutes.
Okay.
Night.